One positive thing that happened today in court, though, was that our first ticket got reprimanded, which sets a precedence in Manitoba for anyone else who has been to these rallies or has been fined. They can go back to this record and say, look, people that were organizers and were fined, their first ticket got thrown out. So they can use that as a precedence to secure that their first ticket can get thrown out. Because that's how the court tends to work. They say, they go back in their history and say, well, under such circumstances, a ticket was waived.
Sharon Vickner, Todd McDougall, Patrick Allard, Dr. Jerry Bohemier, and Pastor Tobias Tisson. All are vocal Manitoban supporters of civil liberties and advocates for the reduction of lockdown mandates. Given thousands of dollars in fines and arrested for failure to comply with public health orders which had criminalized public gatherings, they have now been convicted by a judge. These Manitobans aren't the only ones who are faced with COVID fines still. So if you want to help out the people who still have to deal with these bureaucratic tickets, well, go to dropthetickets.com, sign the petition, and show our politicians that Canadians, well, we're done with these bureaucratic, draconian measures that they've been placing on us over the last 2 years in relation to COVID.
Over a period of months and after the issuance of multiple tickets and repeated attempts to educate, members of the Public Safety Investigations Unit obtained warrants of arrest for 6 individuals.
After warrants were issued for their arrest last year, they were forced to sign conditions of release, such as no communication with the others and no attending or promoting rallies in contravention of the Public Health Act. However, after facing the judge, their fines have now been increased, ranging from $14,000 to $35,000.
My only regret is that I didn't go harder.
Yeah, I agree.
And I wasn't louder.
It seems the Crown continues to punish peaceful protesters, and in this case, it seems they're doing so just to make an example out of them, all for these COVID mandates that have now, for the most part, been retired. Well, today we're talking to Pastor Tobias Tisson, one of the individuals in the group that you could call the Manitoba Five, to hear his thoughts and to get a little bit more of an understanding of the situation that these individuals now find themselves faced with.
The interesting thing is there was hundreds of people protesting in Manitoba, but the 5 of us were picked on severely. And there were other organizers who haven't gotten tickets. However, the 5 of us somehow got singled out and really got harassed. And of the latest, whatever we've been in court, the media, of course, the mainstream has been reporting on it. And for some reason, they've been picking on me, especially because on just about every article, I'm on the title page and whatever else you want to call it. Of course, the ability to not gather as a congregation definitely made me question a lot of things and made me ask why this. And we started to research it and look around, and we're like, the facts don't back up what the government is asking from us. And just like I said in the sentencing hearing, that the passing of my father definitely had an aspect to that, because we had the viewing at the funeral home and there was literally only 10 people allowed in at a time. We had a lineup outside of hundreds of people, and they all had to wait their turn, only 10 at a time. And then once we did the funeral, it was an outdoor funeral with people social distancing. We had no proper reception afterwards, and that hurt. And I made statements like that during the sentencing. The other 4 of my friends also did similar statements, and it brought the human element into court. I would say there was probably not a dry eye in court except for the Crown attorneys, the clerk, and the judge, and perhaps my lawyers. But everyone was moved, and that's what we wanted to do, because very often courts are matter of fact, business-like. There's no feelings there, and that was our purpose of bringing in these stories in an attempt to show the judge, look, there's real feelings involved. There's people are suffering, and people don't know. People are committing suicide. People are losing their jobs, and that's what we try to bring in. And we're hoping that as the judge considers everything, that it would make the judge question, is it really a good idea to go after people for just living their life and wanting to be who they are and spend their time like they want to with the friends that they want to? But sadly, we maybe hope for a little too much. And in fact, the fines that I got slammed with now from my judge are actually higher than what it would have been if I would have to pay each fine for the amount that it was written out for. All of these fines are for, I think it was worded something like a contravention of the Public Health Act. And all of them were $1,296. On the second ticket, they lowered it by $296. And then the two following that were exactly the face value of $1,296. And then from there, they went up to $1,800, $2,000, $2,200. And then the last ticket was all the way at $3,500. So one positive thing that happened today in court, though, was that our first ticket got reprimanded, which sets a precedence in Manitoba for anyone else who has been to these rallies or has been fined. They can go back to this record and say, look, people that were organizers and were fined, their first ticket got thrown out. So they can use that as a precedence to secure that their first ticket can get thrown out. Because that's how the court tends to work. They say, they go back in their history and say, well, under such circumstances, a ticket was waived. Or
although those in the Manitoba 5 have received increased fines, Pastor Tobias remains hopeful and mentions how the very first ticket was reprimanded. He hopes this will help set a precedent for those who have yet to fight their lockdown tickets in court. An appeal is expected to be filed later today, so I encourage you guys to keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, I want to leave you with one last message from Pastor Tobias, talking about the parallels that he sees between what his family already fled from in Europe to what he is now being faced with here in Canada. Again, thank you guys for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Sydney Fizzard.
To be forced to go to court, and it's different from doing a lawsuit like we did last year, where we were suing the government for restricting the churches. This time, I had to appear in court because of the fines and because of the arrest. And what was so disappointing was that about 3 weeks before our court date, which began August 22nd now, the Crown put forth a motion to dismiss our charter arguments. Mm-hmm. And sadly, the judge sided with that, even though we brought enough evidence that the judge could have said, okay, there's new evidence since last year of May that I can hear your arguments. So the judge was saying last year in May, the Gateway Challenge, where 6 churches sued the Manitoba government, that judge decided that our Charter of Rights was not violated. And so that was the Queen's Bench. Now we're dealing in a provincial court, which is a lesser court. And so the judge said, well, I'm a lesser court, so I'm going to go with the decision that was placed last year in May. And that was really, really disappointed because of the amount of harassment I've personally faced, the trauma my children and my family has been through. We were waiting for our day in court to be vindicated and to have that confirmed. Yes, we were right because we were just abiding by our Canadian rights that are contained in the Charter. And it was just extremely disappointing that we had to appear in court and we were not able to use our own laws. It hit me pretty deeply this week as I was getting ready on Monday morning to go to court, and reminded me of the reason why we moved to Canada. My parents were in and out of court for homeschooling in Germany. And the reason why we decided to move here was because one by one, the laws that were supporting the rights that my parents had were taken away from them. And to the point where their lawyers said, look, the only way you're going to protect your children is if you leave the country. And now here I am, some 16 years later, having to go through the same thing my parents have gone through. And it gives a person a very insecure feeling about the country they're living in. And I sure hope somehow this can turn around. But if not, we know that there is a day coming where true judgment will be given, and where every wrong will be righted.
Go to dropthetickets.com, sign the petition, and let our politicians know that Canadians, well, they're tired of these vaccine mandates and these tickets that, even though everything has been lifted, even though life is trying to go back to normal, they still want to punish the Canadians who've been struggling over the last 2 years to survive with massive, massive fines. And if you think that's wrong, that should be done away with, that these Canadians shouldn't still have to go through the courts and battle thousands of dollars in fines, well, go to dropthetickets.com.